I'm Tatiana Macedo and I'm a visual artist. I work mainly with film, photography, expanded cinema and installation. I studied fine arts and visual anthropology, but my work draws from painting, sculpture, theater, cinema, music, dance and architecture. There is a deep relationship between image and sound. I often say that photography and cinema are as much about what they reveal as about what they conceal. In an analogy with sound, one could say that photography and cinema can only exist in the intervals of silence. The political in my work lies in there, the attention and sensitive observation of the little things. They are in fact the bigger picture. You have to read what's unwritten, you have to see what's unspoken. There is always a certain sensuality. It comes with tension, from very small gestures, from the pace, the time, real time, and very often from the absence of speech, or in other cases, from the power of words. There is also movement and rhythm. There is also an haptic quality to my work. The body is present, and the mind has to fill in the gaps of interpretation and translation, from an image of reality to the reality of the image. Now I'm going to tell you the story behind Film Book Film. In 2014, I visited an old friend from college in Norway. She was doing volunteer work at the literary festival in Lillehammer. One day I went with her and helped with the props. They were doing these props with old books, discarded books, and suddenly this book came into my hands. The grainy black and white photographs caught my attention. I then realized this was a film that had been turned into a book, a children's book. There were also some pencil marks on some of the pages, most probably done by a child, probably the owner of the book. At the end of the book, there is a music score. I then found out that this was the main score of the film, the original film, that the book was translated from. I brought the book back with me and I had it sitting in my shelf for many years. Until, in 2021, I was approached by the editors of the Garage Journal. They asked if I wanted to submit a visual essay. They were doing an whole issue, rethinking moving image in the museum. I realized this was the opportunity to do something about that book, sitting there. I've always wanted to turn that book into a film again. So Film Book Film becomes a transmedial artwork. It starts with a children's book adaptation of a film and then picking up the discarded book and translating it back into a film again. One of the first challenges imposed by this idea was the copyright. Books, films and music have strong legal copyright protection that I needed to address. I realized along the way that the problem with images has to do with their physicality. If I scanned the book, those printed pictures would regress to an immaterial form. This immateriality makes them regress to a pre-authorship stage, which then puts me in breach of copyright, meaning I cannot manipulate them as if they were my own. The only way to get around this was to work with the book as an object. The solution was to film the book and the pictures inside the book in order to make the video a matter of witnessing an existing object. Before I started filming, I approached the composer with my idea of translating the book back to a film again and challenged him to freely interpret the film score, which appears on the last page of the book. He carefully deconstructed the music score. He listened to the original recordings and understood its harmonic field. He then developed major and minor harmonies, played simultaneously and oscillating microtonal frequencies, created digitally through granular synthesis and noise. These particles were an echo of the image grain from the analog photographs in the book. Towards the end, the sound grain becomes denser and larger, achieving a climax that later dissipates and returns to the beginning in a nostalgic loop of memory and reminiscence. You would never recognize the final sound mapping as the original score. And I was also aware that the more we get closer to an image, the more it recedes. And there are several moments of play in this piece, like the gestures of those hands that appear and disappear, which are both my own hands and my assistant's hands. I often use a subtle yet incisive humor in my work, and I need these moments of release from the tension created by the haptic observation and micro-actions that I often explore. And a new experience evolves as the film alternates between objective and subjective shots, where we are both readers and spectators, all done with glimpses of humor.